The weight of the waves. The first time Mark Hawkins learned the sea could love you and still let you drown, he was 12 years old, on the headland above Mousehole, binoculars knocking his ribs. Down below, the Rosie May, his father's inshore potter, lay heeled on a reef that did not know the word sorry. The swell worked at her patiently, as if time were a tool. The sky had been brisk and blue at breakfast. By noon it discovered opinions, and by mid-afternoon it was the sort of weather neighbors mention by your first name. On the quay, men who had known his father since school moved with that terrible calm small places bring to bad luck. Someone ran for the boathouse. Someone phoned Newlyn. A gull laughed like a drunk. Mark's mother, Elsie, stood 2 paces left of him, making the shape of prayer with her hands, but holding it privately. She did not touch him. If she did, both of them might break. His younger sister, Nia, was at the edge of their aunt's coat, thumb in her mouth, eyes older than the afternoon. It had gone wrong very quickly. A fouled warp, a cross sea boxing him. The engine stubbed and then coughed to death at precisely the point where the tide denies negotiation. He had seen his father ride out a dozen incidents worse, in weather less forgiving. But today, the sea had chosen. It does not need reasons. The inshore lifeboat launched, orange against slate. Radios crackled on hips and in pockets. The words were clipped and brave, and underneath them, one long, unbroken sentence of fear. Mark lifted the binoculars again, learned what helplessness does to breath. "They'll get him," said a woman he didn't know, because that's what you say to other people's children when you need it to be true. They always do. The ILB shouldered through chop and white water until it could not. The reef that held the Rosie May held the sea too. A larger boat was coming, bigger engines, bigger hull, but it was 2 bays away, and the weather had decided to change the maps. Someone said, "Coastguard are scrambling," and he filed the word scrambling away, with other grown-up words that taste of metal. He couldn't see a helicopter. He couldn't see his father. He could see the deck tilt, then right, then tilt again, more. A man at the rail began to explain to a knot of people how the rescue would go if they could put a swimmer in the water. He used his hands the way people do when they want the world to obey. The swimmer, on a line, in a dry suit, the right kind of knife, a rope bag ready to pay out, would go from the lee, not the windward side. He'd carry a strop if he had it, or a spare waistline. He'd talk the casualty quiet. He'd clip him. He'd lie on his back. He'd kick like a man with a job. He'd be a hinge between drowning and not drowning. "We had a swimmer. He'd be off that rock now," the man said. Not cruelly, just saying what the day asked him to say. Mark lowered the binoculars. The lifeboat tried again, brave to the point of insult. A wave reached along the reef, found the Rosie May, and ended the argument with a tired shove. The boat rolled far enough that sound left her. There was a shape in the water then. Not a man, not yet. Just something the sea had borrowed. The helicopter came too late. It thundered up the coast, pale underbelly grey as gull feathers, downdraft flattening a portion of the afternoon. People tilted their faces to it the way people tilt to rain at 9 years old. Rope uncoiled. A dark figure dropped cleanly. For a breath, time reconsidered. Then the sea resumed. They did all the right things. They always do. They brought his father back to the quay under a blanket, not because he was cold. A paramedic spoke to Elsie in a room that had once been for nets. There was a kettle going. There is always a kettle going. Nia slept on a coat, with her thumb still in her mouth, because the body holds to what it knows. Mark stood quietly by the back door while adults arranged the shape of a new world. He saw his father's boots, cleaned of weed, placed by a chair as if their owner might come back in and slip into them. He put his fingers into the lace at the top of one boot and felt the salt stiff in it. He took his hand away. He did not cry. He did not move. He learned in that long, dull hour that a certain sort of silence is heavier than shouting. Later, when the house was full of cousins and casseroles, he walked out into the lane by himself. The air tasted of engine fumes and rain. He heard the helicopter again, far away, going to someone else. He wanted, more than he had ever wanted anything, to rewind the day and put a swimmer in the water sooner, nearer, different. The next morning, he went to the harbour before anyone woke, sat on the wall where men flicked tea into the tide, and made a promise to a piece of old rope. If such men existed, he would become one. A boy's life became a corridor, school, fish shop, homework that smelled of iodine. He grew like a mast. He learned the names of the reefs in both languages, Cornish and weather. He learned the shipping forecast by heart, not because he liked the poetry, but because it told him which doors the sea would leave open. He ran, he swam in winter. He took detours home to watch the lifeboat crew drill from the slip, counted the seconds they took to turn a human-made knot into a clean line. On a morning you could spread with butter, he walked to the boathouse and asked the coxswain, Mr. Triggear, ribs helm, eyes pale as hail, if he could help coil lines. Triggear looked at him like men look at their younger selves and said, "Aye, if you coil it, so I don't have to uncoil it first." He coiled rope until his hands remembered the lay on their own. He learned that a clean coil will not snarl in the dark. He didn't ask about swimmers. He listened. He shut up. He did the things no one wants to do and did them properly. On a wall behind a plastic kettle, there was a photograph of the Penley lifeboat men, the ones who went out on a Christmas and did not come back. Men had put their grief into that frame so long ago, it had grown shiny. Even so, it had edges. Mark filed those faces beside his father's boots. He grew into his promise the way you grow into a boat you've built. At 17, he could swim from Newlyn to the harbour mouth and back before breakfast. At 18, he joined a volunteer cliff rescue team and learned the flavour of rope over limestone, of iron taste in the mouth at the top of a pitch. He learned to leave bravado for funerals. He learned to say rope free in a voice other people wanted to hear. At 19, on a night when the wind came from 4 directions at once, he helped carry a stretcher a mile across rough ground while the rain did its impression of a hand slapping. A nurse at the casualty handover said, "You should go farther with this." He said, "I intend to." He wrote to the Coastguard, applied for a trainee winchman post, and was turned down because his eyes were perfect, but his experience not yet long enough. He applied again. He took a job at sea for a summer, on a bigger boat out of Haley, where men teach you laughing, and learned that the ocean has 1,000 noises for later. He applied again. On the 3rd letter, the envelope came back with a postcode that mattered and a date. "You're daft," said his Uncle Bryn fondly. "Daft and stubborn." "Family trait," Mark said. Elsie watched him pack, like a person putting away Christmas decorations they might not see again. She held his face in both hands, the way she had not done since he was 10, pressed her thumb to the point between his eyebrows where worry lives. "You do it because you love it, not because you owe it," she said. "Promises can become anchors." He kissed her hair. He said, I'll try. Training began in a hangar that smelled of hydraulic breath and floors cleaned twice a day. The building was new compared to the sea, but old enough that the walls had learned what men do with fear. They were a dozen, recruits with lifetimes behind them and futures to be negotiated. A former Marine whose smile came late, a sheaf cutter from Falmouth with arms like scaffolding, a wiry electrician who moved like a bird, a goalkeeper whose knees had chosen a different career for him. They were taught to be the same shape of useful. On day one, the instructor, McCrae, barrel of a man, soft voice, Aberdeen baked into his vowels, walked them past a helicopter and did not stop to show it off. He tapped the belly of the aircraft with 2 knuckles for luck and led them to a pool where the water wore a soft, mean grin. The sea is not your enemy, McCrae said. It's your boss. You can argue, you can appeal, but it signs your timesheets. Some days it calls you into the office and tells you jokes. Some days it fires you. Breathe when you can, don't when you can't, and we'll get along. They learned to breathe first. Breath in stages. 4 in, 4 out, the numbers a way to box panic. They learned to smile when they were not smiling, because frightened people watch your mouth. They learned what a hand on the shoulder can do that words cannot. The pool held the dunker. A mock cockpit flipped into water by a lever you began to resent. They strapped in. Let the world turn. The bubbles move like coins. They counted, found the reference point, the window frame, the seatbelt buckle, unclipped, and moved out. The trick was to move slowly when the body says fast. The trick was to choose. They did it dry, then they did it wet, then McCrae turned the lights out and switched on a speaker that played a sound effect of a child crying because the universe is not tidy. Mark found the bar with his left hand on the 3rd try and unclipped on muscle memory. The water in his ears sang. When he came up, he found himself laughing in that breathless way that is not a joke. The goalkeeper, Paolo, spluttered next to him and said, I've played away at Millwall. This is friendlier. They learned ropes, knots you can tie with gloves, knots you can untie in the dark, knots that will behave in salt. They learned to carry a line without letting it talk. They learned how a cable sings when it's correct and how it screams when it isn't. They learned to love routine, the way some people love jazz. They ran. The instructors did not shout because shouting adds nothing you can spend at night. They moved them to the edge and left them there long enough to see what shape they were. In a cold shed, they sat on plastic chairs while a medic described hypothermia carefully, as if it were an animal you could house train. He showed them what shivering is for, what silence can mean, what numbers look like when they are colder than you want to understand. He poured a bucket of water over McCrae's head and made the class warm him, fast, clean, correct. McCrae drank his tea and let them learn. They learned winch discipline in a harness on a gantry first, then under the belly of a machine that made the ground remember gravity. The rotor wash threw their thoughts backward. They learned to clip, unclip, check, signal, be boring. Boring is how you go home. On a Tuesday that tasted of iron filings, the wire jammed on purpose and everyone practiced not being clever. You go still. You unlearn flinching. You talk clean. You do one thing, then the next thing. Mark found in himself a space that wasn't dramatic and wasn't empty. It was simply work. Evenings, he took a bus to a room in a terrace where a landlady left bread by the microwave and told him about her grandson who wanted to be a firefighter because the helmets looked brave. He wrote to his mother, short notes heavy with weather. He ran laps of a square under sodium lights, learned the town's particular dogs, and which garden at number 12 smelled like tomato leaf. One weekend, he went home and stood on the quay at Mouse Hole, and nothing new happened, which is a miracle. He walked to the reef and said nothing, and put his hand in the water anyway, and let it take the heat from the palm that had once gripped a bootlace. Back at the pool, McCrae said, "You're not here to be a hero. You're here to be useful. There's a difference. Heroes do well in songs. Useful men sleep." They rehearsed contact, how to meet a panicked swimmer in a way that shifts terror into task. Don't fight, float, talk like a radiator, quiet and warm. Let them see your eyes. Let them see your hands. If they climb, you go low and break the hold without breaking the person. Mark left the pool one day with a bruise in the shape of a man's fear on his forearm and took it home like homework. They practiced cliff lifts with the litter edges and friction. Easy does it. They learned to look at a face and know whether to promise, whether to distract, whether to lie kindly. They learned to love checklists more than swagger. They learned where to put the pump when the deck won't make space for it. They learned that your knife is there to cut rope, not to feel brave. On a dawn made of zinc, they finally earned the ocean. They winched from a rib in short chop, up, down, spin, check. The winch operator, Jory, a quiet man with a past he'd handed in at the door, talked into their headsets with the tone you use to talk a friend down from a fence. "You're good," he said to Mark. "There's a steady in you." "Practice," Mark said. "Practice makes receipts," Jory said. "You'll see." Weeks turned into muscle memory. The failing out stopped. The class grew edges and then sanded them down together. Paolo found his water courage. The sheaf cutter learned grace. The electrician could fold a line perfect with one hand. They weren't a team yet, but they had the shape of one. On the day the exams began, the wind favored them. Mark laid out his kit, and because he was a superstitious man who didn't like to be, took the figure-8 knot he'd tied on the first day and retied it quietly. He passed each station with a margin that felt honest. In the medical drill, the actor coughed salt water and tried to die. Mark gave him a voice to follow, an oxygen mask to argue with, numbers the medic nodding it said were correct. McCrae shook his hand without ceremony. "You'll do," he said, which is what men like him say when they mean well done. He was posted to Penzance. Penzance base is a smell and a rhythm. Hydraulic heat in winter, damp neoprene on a Tuesday, instant coffee, fresh tea, the laughter of people who aren't laughing about the important things. The corridor has a hum to it. The crew room contains the exact number of chairs required, and one more that no one uses. There are boots where there should be boots. There is a view from the end of the runway that most people take a photograph of, and most crew do not. On his first morning, the senior winchman, the one he'd replace one day without understanding, the one the younger hands called Griff, handed him a mug that would scald a tongue clean, and looked him up and down as if checking a weather chart. Behind Griff, a tall man, with mischief resting lightly on him, sharpened a pencil, like it had opinions. "This is Tom Tyers," Griff said. "He'll tell you what not to do, then do it, then say he told you so." Tom grinned, gave Mark a hand that knew it was a hand. "Everyone calls him Griff because it fits his face," he said. "Everyone calls me Tom because they like me." Mark liked him immediately, and then made a point of not showing it, because that is how trust grows, one dry joke at a time. Tom was Somerset-born with a Cornish soul. He had the kind face of a man your mother would feed, and the reckless patience of someone who saves their risk for the correct moment. He was a month ahead of Mark on paper, but 5 years ahead of him in the head. A photograph on the shelf showed him as a younger man with a buzz cut and a look that he'd misplaced, and did not miss. They drilled that week, then drilled again. Winch work off the Silonian's wake until Mark's harness felt like part of him. Tom's voice in his ear, light as salt. Your feet are lying. Ignore them. The deck is where it is, not where your legs think it should be. The winch op, Kes, Senon-born, sly, kind, running the cable like he was making lace. The pilots, Steph and Much, talking the sky into cooperation. Tom had the gift of making complexity look like boredom. He showed Mark how to stand on a rib so the rib forgot he was there. He showed him how to move air from one frightened lung into another man's head. He showed him where to put the pump so the hose wouldn't find mischief. He showed him the shelf where the Penley photograph lived and didn't say anything at all. On a Thursday, that thought it was a Monday, Mark's harness buckle stuck. He went to force it. Tom tapped his helmet instead. Everything that sticks wants to be bullied, Tom said. This is not true. Work it like it owes you rent, not like it owes you blood. Understood, Mark said. You will, Tom said. In the third week, a fisherman came in with a finger in a cool bag and a grin he did not earn. Tom sutured what could be sutured, kept the jokes out of the air, got him tea, sent him to A&E, and came back to the crew room and sat quietly with his head in his hands for exactly 16 seconds. Then he stood up and taught Mark how to throw a heaving line in wind. When Mark told Tom, a month later, what had happened to the Rosie May, Tom stood without ceremony and took him to Mousehole. They walked the quay where boys swear and tourists learn to. Tom listened, hands in pockets, eyes on the water. He did not do any of the soft talk men do when they don't want to be here. He did the better thing and didn't say, I understand. On the way back, they stopped for a pasty that burned Mark's tongue, and Tom said, It's not why you're good. It's a road you took to get good. Keep the difference tidy. They became friends in the way busy men do, accidentally and completely, one unremarkable afternoon after another. They cooked badly in a shared kitchen. They had a private debate about whether instant mash counts as food. Tom stole Mark's pen, and then returned it 3 days later because the cap had developed a perfect notch. They went out after a night shift and watched the sun pretend to rise behind cloud and did not speak, which was the point. On a Saturday morning that smelled like someone had opened a cupboard of summer, the page sounded, and the bass gathered, and the helicopter breathed in, and the crew moved like they had been rehearsing for this day since before they were born. Fishing boat, Kes said, snapping a harness. 6 miles west of Wolf Rock, skipper reports engine failure. 1 man green, 1 man bleeding, taking water. Wind? Steph asked. Southwesterly with envy, Much said, reading the chart. Sea's nasty, a meter shorter than we want. Let's bring home a story we can moan about later, Griff said, and that was a blessing. They were over Mounts Bay in 2 minutes and out beyond the happy places in 5. Wolf Rock's lighthouse stood sulking, the sea pushing at it with teenage shoulders. The Trevelyan, 24 feet a long way from shore, slid in the troughs like a thought, losing its place. Tom glanced at Mark, the sort of glance that is a paragraph. We'll take the strop first, pump after. You're on my shoulder. I. Rotor wash flattened an argument with the elements. Kes's cable sang. Tom dropped to deck with the grace of a thing that wanted to be there. Mark followed, every nerve remembering where his hands were. The deck was wet and negotiating. The skipper's eyes had that boiled sugar shine that means a man has decided to be practical and will cry if allowed. The deckhand, who'd turned green, had also turned the wrong color around the mouth. The third man had a deep cut on the cheekbone that needed later, and probably a stitch from A&E, who will raise an eyebrow and do it anyway. "Pump!" Tom shouted, because water steals time. Mark secured the pump, found the line, bled it, set the strainer where it would behave. The first cough of success is one of the better sounds a man can hear. The Trevelyan stood a fraction prouder in the sea. They clipped the seasick man and sent him up, his mouth making the O of a man who has found a god he didn't previously observe. Second lift, the injured one. The skipper shook his head at going next in the way skippers do. Tom nodded once the way Tom does. On the third pass, the weather made a new choice. The helicopter shifted. Nothing dramatic, just the air changing mind. The cable went slack, then tight. The Trevelyan slewed. A wave came the wrong way. Mark had one hand on the rail and one on the hook when a coil of loose rope on deck chose that exact second to remember it was alive and snared his ankle. He swore, salt and simple, and went down to a knee. The hook swung, kissed his shoulder, spun him. Tom's hand was on him, fast as a thought, dragging him back to the angle that earns you living. "Knife," Tom said. It was calm. It was a reminder that knives are for rope. Mark's blade found the line, worked, clean, no sawing, no drama. The rope parted with a sound like a secret. He breathed, counted, felt the ankle rage at him, and then agree to the plan. "Ready?" he said into his mic. "Send." Kez's voice in his ear smiled without smiling. "I've got you." The skipper went up, stiff with the knowledge that he was allowed to. "Your turn," Tom said, and the voice had a weight to it. "You're lighter. I'll be the last." "We've got fuel for one more pass," Steph said, in the ear everyone shared. The helicopter made its own sums. Mark clipped. The deck rose to meet him, like a friend who is bad for you. He rose with the cable, and the sea roared its general objections. He swung once, corrected, came into the machine's belly with his breath where he'd left it. He turned at the door. Wider world, narrower choices, and looked down. Tom, on the Trevelyan's deck, small and certain, hand light on the rail, already looking at the pump and then at the sky, weighing the distance in a squint. Kez brought the hook down, like a man placing a glass on a mantelpiece. Tom reached. "Hold," Steph said, because the helicopter had thoughts about wind and fuel and the geometry of the next 30 seconds. A shadow crossed the Trevelyan. Not weather, not water. Something larger. A container ship, unannounced. Far enough, but not far enough. The wake behind it, a wall pretending to be a wave. "Big wash coming," Much barked, the voice all angles. "We are tight on fuel." The Trevelyan turned beneath the wrong piece of sky. The wall of water arrived late and rude. It lifted the boat, rolled it half a thought too far, and suddenly the stanchions were the wrong way, and Tom was exactly where he should not be, between the rail and a question the sea was asking. Mark's hands moved without permission to the gate, as if he could pull the world up by its collar. Kez's cable flicked, taut, then slack, then taut again, talking too fast. The hook skittered. Tom saw the wash, placed his feet where there weren't any, and made the shape of a man who has learned long ago to be both present and disinterested in panic. "Tom," Mark said into the mic he didn't know he'd keyed. Fine, Tom said, like a liar telling a good story. Send it, Kez. Kez sent it. The hook came true, and then a shockwave of wind rolled the helicopter 1 degree more than anyone liked, and the hook kissed steel and sparked like a thought being born. The Trevelyan lurched. Steph held the aircraft in a place human hands have no right to hold it. Tom moved. Half step, right foot, left hand. He caught the hook like it was a ball he'd been thrown as a child. He went to clip. The boat fell out from under him. For a long, thin moment, the world was geometry and noise. The cable's angle, the distance between Tom's harness and the hook, the exact rate at which gravity calls in debts. Mark saw it all at once, averaged it, found it wanting. Tom, he said, but the word left late. Tom's hand missed steel. His body found air. For a frame, the whole picture held. Man, cable, boat, sky. Like a child's mobile that has just been tapped. Then the sea took what it had reached for all day. Tom went over the rail and into water that never promised to be fair. Kez swore once, and the word had all of the years in it. Mark, Steph, clean, urgent. I'm on, Mark said, already clipping back to the hook that had kissed his shoulder, already moving to the door the way a boy runs downhill. Commit or fall. Wait for green, Kez said, because there are rules even under this sky. The Trevelyan bucked in a new rhythm that had consequences. The helicopter counted fuel with a jealous brain. The container ship's wake paid its last installment and went looking for someone else. Mark hung in the door with the sea under him and the man he liked somewhere in a color that doesn't forgive. His ankle hurt with clarity. The cable felt like a friend holding a sleeve. The world narrowed to a point, then widened to a choice. Mark, Kez said again, lower now. Go clean. The green light winked. The rotor wash flattened his thoughts into what could be used. He leaned into the hole the sky had made, and the cable took him, and the air rearranged its furniture to let him pass. He went down into the old water with the new rules loud in his head. Breathe, count, don't promise what you can't keep. Eyes searching for a face he knew better than he had intended to this soon. Below him, a hand appeared, then an elbow, then the black crown of a helmet, and a mouth that was where oxygen wants to be. Tom surfaced into the world again with the reflex of a man who has never believed he deserves it and still takes it anyway. He spat, laughed once, a ridiculous small sound in a big place, and lifted an arm. Cable, hook, swell, breath. Mark reached. He was a boy with binoculars and a man with training, and neither and both. The wave between them grew a spine. The helicopter shifted, Kez coaxed, the cable arced. Mark's glove closed on Tom's harness and met Water's argument and didn't lose. Tom's eyes were clear and furious and very much alive. He lifted his other hand to help himself clip. A hiss in Mark's ear, a voice he loves and fears in equal proportion. Fuel at bingo. You've got one. The wave rose. Mark clipped the hook. The wave broke. Everything went white and loud. To be continued in part 2.